I know this thing is on, and I know that you can hear me. Nursing and healthcare needs advocates and activism. So what are you waiting for? So, welcome to the show, Meg. I'm so glad that you're here to have this conversation with me tonight. I think that there's going to be some buzz about this one. I'm sure of it because our nursing community is a very interesting community when it comes to talking about Florence Nightingale. I think that people hold her very near and dear to their hearts, and it's not to discount that there are some positive things, but with the positive, we have to talk about some of those challenges and some of the negatives in relation to having, I would say, almost a martyr type of figure, or even maybe this is more poignant, thinking about a figure who you cannot criticize.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we get into some sticky types of situations. If you can't look at a leader and you can't criticize them or see their faults, then do you really have a democracy? Anywho's, before we get started, I think it's probably good that people know a little bit about you. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of what led you, maybe even like why you decided to be a nurse? Let's start there.
Yeah. So my name is Meg Lambrych. I've been a registered nurse in the US for 7 years. I'm also a freelance writer and health journalist, and I've been doing that for 5 years. I actually am one of the classic cases of probably someone who shouldn't have been a nurse. I didn't want to be a nurse. I wanted to be a doctor. And I was born into a low income family that were extremely not supportive of that idea. And like so many other people, nursing was the quickest path to a paycheck in healthcare. And I'm actually unbelievably happy that I went to nursing school instead of medical school. I'm married to a physician. I've been with him through every step of his journey. So I've got a really good view of what both of those education paths are like and career paths are like. And I have wholly and completely fallen in love with everything nursing is. Um, and because of that, I am fiercely on a mission to make it better.
It sounds kind of familiar to my story in terms of just being like, I actually thought I was going to be a journalist. So I guess I've somehow kind of rounded that
Yeah,
circle out at some point in time, right? I was like, oh, I'm going to be like a weather girl. I'm going to be like on, Channel 5, being like, here's the weather today.
way clear.
Did not that dream did not come true, but there I am still doing journalism in my own way. But yeah, this kind of roundabout like
Hmm.
sense that I think there is such a duty that we have as nurses. And I think the biggest duty is advocacy, right? I think I keep on hearing this now, and maybe you're seeing it too, where people are just like, nursing isn't political. Like, nursing is 100% political. Like, if there's any profession that I can think of that has this many intersections with policy, it's us. We are literally at the ground where we meet patients, where we can see all those intersections of health. So, for those folks that say healthcare isn't political, we'll get to them too. Don't worry.
Yeah.
um,
Okay,
but
well,
right, I'm sure you've been hearing it a lot over the last couple
my whole
days.
life.
Yeah. And I want to get into a little bit about your journey into nursing because it was probably similar to mine in terms of probably where your love and your grit kind of came from too. So could you maybe give me a little bit of a backstory about how
Yeah.
you got into nursing and then how you got into like medical writing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was a second career nurse. And my first degree was in exercise science. I was a personal trainer for many, many years and, still always had a love for anatomy and training and coaching folks, but wanted some more stability. Fitness is a wonderful career, but it's not very stable. So, I knew that I wanted a career that was grounded in health that was more stable, which is what brings so many people to nursing, right? It's a wonderfully stable career insofar as the income.
Right.
I yeah, I did one of those. I went to the University of Rochester School of Nursing, which is one of those ultra accelerated bachelor's programs. I got a 4-year degree in 12 months,
Whoa, that
which
is ultra. accelerated.
Yeah, it was super, super fun. Definitely an experience. And yeah, so I took my new grad job. I fell in love completely with cardiac nursing. And so I was lucky. I got offered one of only 2 spots in the very prestigious cardiac ICU right across the street as a new grad. And I took that job and I thought it was going to be the start of a long, prosperous critical care and perhaps one day, anesthesia nursing career. And it was anything but.
I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, and it's one of those situations where every single person who found out that I was going to work there, professors, other students, everyone and their brother told me not to take the job because this ICU at this facility was legendarily toxic. I mean, it was the worst kept secret in the city.
Right.
Everyone knew you didn't want to work there because the environment was just so incredibly violent, but it was the coolest medicine to me in the world. And so many people think, well, I'll just, you hear about bullying in nursing and, we all have, different reactions to that, I guess. I thought I could tough it out and that my love of cardiac medicine would be enough. And it just wasn't. And
Yeah.
I think it isn't for the vast majority of us. And I've seen so many wonderful people who are great nurses just get put through the meat grinder. And we all know those units. Those units, every hospital has one, at least one, if not numerous. Nursing has a foundational accountability issue. And everything we're going to talk about today is going to come back to that. Whether it's racism in nursing, lateral violence, which overlaps very heavily with racism in nursing, right? Lateral violence is the enforcement mechanism that we use to punish other nurses. So whether it's because they're Black or Indigenous or brown or queer or neurodivergent, lateral violence is simply the tool used to punish the other.
It is.
And it's kind of the interest of my life, and I wonder if one day I'm going to write a book on it because it seems like I'm really starting to form the opinion that lateral violence as nursing is not a problem, but it's not a bug, it's a feature. Because in my 7 years and in my degree and all of my research and all of my writing, my journalism, lateral violence is unbelievably well studied. We have piles of literature on it, and everyone and their brother understands it. And yet it's still endemic. And so, and the exact same thing can be said about racism in nursing, right? Every once in a while, at least when it was politically expedient, we had these nursing organizations like the ANA making vague gestures, at least with position statements and things that the
Right.
C-suite class love to do about, how they're sorry. I mean, we all remember the position statement. And absolutely nothing about the material conditions of nursing have changed. And we all know that.
And you would think that with what's happening currently, that would be seeing more position statements. But again, this is where you can see where the rubber meets the road in terms of how organizations position themselves in terms of what they actually think is the right thing to do versus, sorry, I should say doing the right thing versus actually, standing in solidarity with. And there have been many opportunities just within the last, 48 hours for our nursing organizations to come out and say a variety of different things, whether it is in relation to police brutality, whether it is in relation to ICE and detention centers, our communities being torn apart, whether it has to do with Gaza, Sudan, Iran, any of these places. And of course, it will be radio silence because racism within nursing and nursing itself has to deal with its issue in relation to white supremacy and really whiteness. And it's going to take some courage maybe for some people because again, I think there are other folks that have to step up. Like I have this conversation all the time. So it's not for me, it's not this like big surprising moment when I'm saying, hey, here's the problem. But there
Yeah.
are other people that we have to
Well,
kind of
so
poke in the chest a little, do
until
something.
we in the US deal with our original sins, we are going to reincarnate the same systems over and over. And there's a couple of them. Obviously, the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Indigenous peoples, the chattel slavery, ethnic cleansing, and slavery that never ended but just kept getting reinvented, right? It got reinvented into Reconstruction, and then Reconstruction into Jim Crow, and then Jim Crow into complete and total police brutality with impunity. So every few years or so, every few generations, slavery just finds a new form that's more palatable and a little bit sneakier, but no less real for, Black and brown and indigenous people in the United States. So, and the original sin, so not only did we not make any type of amends with those people, we didn't make any reparations. In fact, we gave reparations to slave owners.
Right. Yep.
That's why we're here. We didn't punish the Confederacy appropriately, right? And any other nation, murderous traitors would be executed, at least their leaders. We didn't do that. We let them completely assimilate back. We gave them all their power and their wealth, and we let them just slip right in and build half of our nation. And because of that, and then, we took about 1,500 Nazis in Operation Paperclip, so far less important, but not important enough to mention, right? Germany did a phenomenal job of punishing and holding Nazis accountable. We just happened to take all the smartest ones we can get, and we let them, go right into our culture. And now we are living under martial law, under complete fascist totalitarianism. So everything we're talking about in the microcosm of nursing goes out to the macro ecosystem of the United States, right? We are here because of white cowardice, is the bottom line. Racism is the work of white people, just like violence against women is the work of men. And if I give that analogy to white women, usually they can understand it, right? The issue is not me holding my keys in my hand in a certain way. The issue is you need to stop murdering, raping, and brutalizing women. That's the issue in society that we have to shift, right? But for some reason, and the reason is cowardice, the reason is discomfort, and the reason is we have allowed it to be so. We have not punished white supremacists. And I think a lot of well-meaning white people and white nurses are under the impression that hateful ideologies like fascism, Nazism, white supremacy will die out.
Yeah, I do believe that's what people think, right?
Yep. And it's been proven patently false, right? We're going on 400 years from the beginning of chattel slavery. If anything, the younger generations of Gen Z are far more conservative. The men are. The women of Gen Z are actually the most progressive, but the men are even more conservative than boomers. So this idea that these hateful, violent ideologies will just somehow pass a natural death is just, history doesn't bear it out. They have to be killed. They have to be uprooted. They have to be exterminated. And we haven't done that work here.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, that might be a tough pill to swallow, right? People will be saying, how could we just do that? And I think that, your example is quite clear. We're diverging a little bit here. I don't know what the state of America as it stands today is going to continue to look like if people don't wake up and realize that what they're seeing in their very own eyes. Like I had put out that TikTok. You should see the comments that people have sent me in relation to how evil I am as a person to say that there are any similarities between what's happening with ICE and what's happened with, Nazi Germany. And it's happening right in front of your face.
All people of the global world know this, but Americans don't. And so it bears repeating. If you are a nurse, an educator, anyone watching this, and you don't realize Americans are the most propagandized population to have ever existed. There is a multi-trillion dollar machine that has been running our entire lives, and it gets tweaked for every generation. We are so incredibly disconnected from the rest of the world. And I think, obviously you're Canadian. People, when they interact with Americans internationally, really are jarred by how disconnected and uneducated. But even those of us, right, the nursing community is a perfect example. At least 30% of nurses self-reported to have voted for Donald Trump. So we have at least 30% of our oppression are outright avowed fascists.
Right.
what do we do with that as a profession? How do we save patients? How do we save each other? And that's a core part of this article, which is, why we were originally having this conversation. Dawn Quinique-Joppi is a Black woman who was horrifically brutalized, bullied, targeted, mobbed, fired illegally, and had her life quite literally ruined by her coworkers. There has been zero accountability whatsoever. Those 3 nurses, they all failed up, as white people so often do. They have all moved on. I think one of them is a higher up for JACO.
Yeah. I was looking at some of the names that I received from Dawn Quinique, and it's astonishing how that is.
And it's
How
not
nursing deals with accountability, right?
doesn't deal with it at all, right? At all. We have no accountability. We have 2 representatives who are nurses, who are fascists, who have voted for all of this fascist legislation that is slashing healthcare, slashing food for the poor, slashing education, right? We now have nursing being, recategorized to greatly reduce our ability to access loans for graduate level nursing education. And that's one of many primarily female and BIPOC led professions, right? That's primarily the professions who were affected in that way. None of this is an accident. And you have Dr. Oz, who is still a physician, I think it really just goes to show, and I want your audience to not fall to despair, because hope is a discipline, but you need to understand the reality of what we're working with. This whole, we're all just going to be positive and chipper, and, this white feminist idea that if we just play nice and we don't acknowledge the problems, they eventually go away. You now have a boot on your neck that's finally also on the neck of white women, as it has been on the neck of Black and brown and Indigenous people since our country's inception. And now they're all freaking out, right? Now the white women are sounding the alarm, and they're making strongly worded Instagram and LinkedIn posts about how now they have to speak up. The reality is, everything we do abroad will come home. Everything we do to Black and brown bodies will eventually be done to you. And that's why we begged you for the last 5 to 10 years to care about police brutality and the militarization of the police, and you didn't.
So
We begged you to care about the Palestinian genocide. And most of you, anyone working in nursing education in the US anyways, criminalized, jailed, expelled. It was a bloodbath. People just asking for a genocide to stop. We told you what was being done in Palestine would come home, and now it's here. So what are you going to do about it?
See, this is where I think, Meg, the question stands as to how do we get nurses, people who have any power to do something? Because again, I'll say yeah, I could put it a TikTok, but that's so little in terms of the amount of, I think, the reach that I'd like to get. So how do we get people motivated and activated? And we'll swing back to the article, because you did touch on the niceness trap, and I kind of want to touch on that too. But while we're talking now, how do we get nurses motivated? Because again, when you touched on even the whole aspect of the professionalism and the name, and I remember seeing nurses commenting saying, well, it's not that we're not professionals. That's not what that means. It's just related to education. And it's like, well, do you see how that is a barrier for entrance for other ethnicities, other groups? And it's just like the information's or is it really, right? Sometimes I'm kind of I don't think people are that stupid. There is, maybe some people that don't understand, but I don't know if it's so much as willful ignorance, or it's just this can't happen to me. And people don't realize that they're a moment away from poverty as well. We aren't billionaires. So we are not the majority. And I think this is where people have to have that real conversation, that this isn't about Democrat, Republican, but it is literally a war on class. And we are not of the billionaire class. So whatever is happening out there is not for us whatsoever. And I think people don't get that. Like, even swinging it back to nursing as a profession, do they see themselves as a part of, this select group that we're talking about, maybe the 30%? Do they see themselves as a part of this class, this billionaire class, that it can affect them too?
Yeah, well, this is the tricky thing about fascism, right? So I want to define some terms because I don't know your audience. And I mean, I know your audience, right? But I don't know, I don't want to be
You don't
slinging
want to.
around that people don't maybe understand. And I want to invite every single nurse in America into this conversation. I don't want to be using terms that you don't understand and make anyone feel left out or isolated. Clarity is the only path to truth. So we're using terms like fascism. What does that mean? Aside from a term that you hear all over the mainstream media of everybody calling each other, what does it actually mean to be a fascist? Fascism is not a style of government, but a style of politics. And the thing about fascism, which makes it a little tricky to nail down, is there's not one clean definition. I want you to think of it more like a checklist. So there are hallmarks that fascist leaders and fascist groups use, right, to take advantage of people, to capitalize on race relations and grievances. So at its core, fascism is ultranationalism. So the only thing that matters is my country. That's a core value. And it believes in bringing the nation back to a mythical past. They speak of a magical, mythical past for white men, right? In our nation right now today. In Germany, it was the Aryan man, same thing. And it tells these men who are suffering under capitalism, right? The thing about left-wing populism and right-wing populism, which is fascism, is they hit on a lot of reality, which is why they can be so popular. So in America, we are living under late stage capitalism, which means the very end points of capitalism where things are getting really rough. They're getting very dangerous. They're getting very unstable. We are under an oligarchy, which basically means that the billionaires, of which there's only 1,300 in the entire world, and there's really 5 who are running our country right now. The billionaires and the corporations that they run are really running our country, and they're running the world, right? Because we're such a globalized era. Unfortunately, what we are doing is affecting everyone in every corner of the globe. So over time, in my lifetime, those billionaires and the organizations that they run have accrued more and more power. And the lines between corporate interests and what our government are doing get more and more and more blurred. And that's another hallmark of fascism, right? It's when the government works very closely with corporations and things like monopolies come back. Robber baron capitalism, right? If you remember anything about, when you learned about the era of industrialization, when workers were dying left and right, it was before we had workers' rights. That's what unfettered capitalism looks like. It looks like 3-year-olds working in a factory and people working 7 days a week, people dying constantly, no worker protections. That is what capitalism wants, right? And there's been different points in American capitalism where there's been a little bit more structure, a little bit more regulation. We are pretty unfettered at this point, and we're completely unfettered now under the Trump regime. So, we're in late stage capitalism. Life sucks for Americans. Everyone knows that. That's true. Most people will never buy a house. To get a higher education is to basically put yourself in debt servitude for life. For most people, they're not able to pay them off because the terms of the loans are not fair. And so a fascist comes along and it recognizes these very real problems that are inevitable under capitalism. This sucks. Your lives suck. And so left-wing people and fascists, they're lockstep right now. Yeah, this sucks. Yeah, okay, great. Now, what makes a fascist is instead of solving those problems, right? Instead of going left, workers' rights, unions, rigid structure, regulation, things that actually empower people socialist programs, universal health care, things that make life worth living and high quality, the fascist says, yeah, and it's that guy's fault. And they capitalize on things like racism, homophobia, and they scapegoat the other. So if that sounds familiar, we are right out of the fascist playbook. And so the thing is, to your original question, what do we do about it? I don't know. I'm such a student of history, and I have been feverishly pouring through the books, trying to ask that question to myself. I don't know. Do we balkanize? Is that the future of the U.S.?
Hopefully not. I don't know if we could go that way.
Do we balkanize? Is it an open civil war? I don't know. I do know that I can't think of a single instance in human history where there is this level of open hatred, white supremacy, misogyny, misogynoir, homophobia, transphobia, and just a polarized populace that goes away without, some type of mass conflict. And I'm not a historian, right? I'm just a person who reads. I don't know.
The thing is, yeah, no, I agree with you, Meg. And I think this is where we're having those tough conversations. And I actually had this conversation with my husband earlier, and I was like, we're kind of at this kind of critical stage where, either people wake up and do something, or we're going to continue repeating history. And and I think the piece is, we can't let these books burn. We have to continue to talk about what we're seeing in real time. And you're right. I think the other piece is, I don't have the answer, but I do think it's important that we continue to educate people on the conversation we're having today, like what fascism is and what it actually looks like. Because I think a lot of people don't understand all of these different mechanisms that are put in place by these governments to do these things. And it begs a question to me too. A lot of these various different groups are like anti-government. However, I can't remember the term. It's like slipping out of my mind, but it's just like when they see, for example, because their government's in power, they see, that as the work of the US government. That's that is actually, that's the right way things should be done. But if it was, let's say it was a Democrat that would be tyranny. And I think this is where we have to come to terms that it's not one or the far other, but start really seeing and calling things as what they are. And it's very hard when you're in a cult to be able to call balls and strikes. And I think we are dealing with a lot of hive mind, a lot of people that I would say that, MAGA is a form of a cult as well. And it's very hard when you're in a cult to be able to get out of it. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult. And I think that, the more that people have conversations and we educate people, it's not the only things, but again, you're probably along the same idea as me that there sometimes has to be different forms of political action. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
That we have to see things happening in a very different way, because I keep on seeing these peel backs on civil rights. Like, for example, just recently I saw in the US news that the whole department of, I think it was the Division of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion that would be investigating the death of Renee Good, they all just were like, we're quitting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have so much I want to say, but there's some really important points that I want to stick with before we move on.
Yep. Go jump in.
First and foremost, the most important thing that I need Americans to understand is that we don't even really have a two-party system in the United States. If you look at government in any other part of the world, our liberal Democratic Party is a right-wing party. So that's really important to understand. This is not a Donald Trump problem. This is the foundations of the house are rotten and fetid to their core, and we have to build something better problem. I want you to know that everything you're seeing right now with I'm not even going to call it police brutality because it's just terrorism. It's domestic terrorism. Our government in the U.S. has declared war on the U.S. people. That's not hyperbolic. You know this. You can turn on the news and you can watch. Even if you're used to watching these mainstream media channels that are just state-run propaganda at this point, even they have some trouble, spinning a lot of what these terrorist thugs are doing. And so this is not a Republican problem. The Democrats, since the inception of ICE in 2003, have voted almost unanimously every single year to raise ICE's budget and raise the military's budget and raise local cops' budget. There was a few years in there when we were on the front lines in 2020 in the Black Lives Matter protests where they maybe kind of a little bit pretended like they weren't gonna, and then they went right back to it.
Right. Yeah.
So the terrorism that we're facing right now is a bipartisan project. And in fact, Kamala Harris promised to increase every aspect of the machine. That was one of her only core actual positions that she was able to articulate in her last run was, I'm going to increase ICE budgets. I'm going to be tougher on immigration. So I need you to understand that this isn't a Donald. He is a horrible, horrible person.
Yeah, I don't know why anyone would ever think to themselves.
Let's just go back to brunch. We've been putting immigrants in cages for like 10 years. You just didn't care before. It wasn't a problem before. It didn't concern you before. Now that they're shooting white women in the face, now more people are paying attention. So that's a really important point. Number 2, I'm not going to tell anybody else how to live their life. I was raised MAGA. My entire family is an ultra warrior, militaristic. My entire family is military, infantry, special operations, right? They're the people that loved people. I have an uncle who's a fighter pilot. And I was raised in a deeply authoritarian white Christian nationalist home. All I can tell you is, and experts on cults will tell you the same, I will never waste my breath talking to a white Christian nationalist, talking to MAGA, talking to anybody in the cult. And indeed, usually the experts will tell you that arguing or trying to debate with them is actually how they get people into the cult, not how anybody gets somebody out of the cult. I have no interest whatsoever in trying to harness some ounce of humanity from the nurses who voted for this and are celebrating this. But we far outnumber them. And so instead, how do we move forward? We focus on those of us with a conscience who can see that this is absolutely horrific, and this is not a country we want to live in, and this is not a world we want to live in. So that's what I will be doing with my energy. And I will be, fighting those people openly. I have no interest in playing nice with fascists. You will lose every time. This idea that, if we keep open channels and if we just reach across the aisle, well, we've reached across the aisle into a boot on our neck. So how has that been working for us? It doesn't work. You can't appease fascists. So that is my strategy, right? Focus your energy on the people who actually have a conscience and know right from wrong and are not celebrating women and children getting disappeared into concentration camps and foreign torture prisons.
Yeah. I think that, it's important that we talk about these various different aspects. And I think, again, when we're talking, again, let's just say specifically to nursing, I think, again, like, these conversations don't happen. Let's just be honest. That's the other piece. Like, I think when it comes to nursing as a profession, people just want to say, okay, well, our realm of sphere and control is here. It's this small. At the bedside, it's delivering care, and that's it. And it's not true. And that's, I think, the biggest fallacy. That's why I was like at the top of this episode where I'm like, the biggest part of our job is patient advocacy, is seeing the inequities, is seeing the disparities and seeing the policies that don't align with the way that we have to deliver or see the types of healthcare outcomes that we do see. Like, we are right there at the bedside or in the communities or wherever we are where we can see the issues. So it is our duty, our obligation, our privilege, let me say, to advocate.
Absolutely.
And I think it is
and we're not doing that.
I think it is wild that there is silence. It makes no sense to me that we see the things that we see, we hear the things that we hear. I don't know how, and you're right, I don't know how anybody with a conscience, with a good conscience, can watch something that's happening in the world and as a nurse say it's not my role to say anything. And I've mentioned it in your article about nursing influencers and whatever the case may be. And I think when I think about these particular folks. Just wish we could just remove nursing from that aspect, remove it from the name, because at that point you aren't nursing anymore. You're just influencing. And if it's not to serve and help others, then what are we really doing? That's a whole other part of the conversation. But I think, again, we have a duty and an obligation to do something, to say something. I don't think we're at the point anymore where we can play games and be like, well, I don't want to play politics, or I don't want to offend this person. And it's like, we are at an impasse here where it's not about offending. Like you said, the boot is on all of our necks. And if we don't speak up, there's that speech where it's just like, I didn't say anything about.
Yeah, we're pretty close to the bottom of that, the old poem.
Right?
First you came, we don't have that many people left. You're next.
That's very, very concerning. So I think this is a critical moment for nurses to have say, for nurses to come out and to use their platform or their power. And I'm seeing a little bit of a shift, I have to say. I'm not going to beat up on all nurses. I am seeing that shift. I've had lots of conversations, even over just the last couple of weeks, of nurses who are doing things, but we need to have a collective voice. There's what is it? Something like there's like 4 million nurses in the US, and I think totally there's like 30 million nurses. I think if we could just, for 1 minute, step all in the same direction, how powerful we could be to make change and to have people listen.
Absolutely.
To what we have to say.
But we have to break free from white supremacy culture. Because what constrains us?
What we do. Sorry, go ahead.
About again and again and again and again. Being perceived as good is more important in white womanhood culture than actually being good and doing good.
So how do we...
breaking the law or not breaking rules is more important than possibly doing horrific things or letting horrific things happen.
See, I'm glad that you said that. I'm really glad that you said that.
I want you guys to remember that they hung physicians at Nuremberg. There were nurses working in every concentration camp.
Right. Yep.
The idea that you are just doing your job it was rejected at the Nuremberg trials. So if ICE is in your hospitals and they're disappearing your patients, you are responsible for that. If ICE is on your streets and in your neighborhoods and in your states, and you are not fighting them with everything that you have, you are responsible for that. I think the biggest obstacle that we face in America, it's not the fascists, because fascists always get what's coming to them. Fascist movements always burn out, and they don't end well for them. It's not the fascists. It's the cult of individualism. And that's what scares me the most every time that I'm on the internet and all of the comments that I have to pour through. We are so propagandized to think that, it's too important. My job, my career, my title, little Timmy's soccer practice, there's nothing I can do. So I just have to. That's how they won. That's how they got this far. This idea that convincing the singular most powerful citizens of the most powerful and wealthy nation to ever exist in the history of the world, not in the modern era, Americans have the most power globally. Our hegemony powers are through the roof, and they have convinced us all that we have no power. There's nothing I can do, so I just have to order my Amazon packages and save for a house I'll never buy. That's what scares me. But that is a spell that can be broken. Stepping into collective power is the only path forward. So what do? Meet your neighbors if you haven't already. Make sure they're being fed. Join. If you don't know what mutual aid is, baby, it's time to find out. Mutual aid is the concept of rendering direct aid to those who need it without extra steps, right? White women love organization. They love structure and they love hierarchy because that is what white supremacy is. And I have found that a lot of people are very uncomfortable, You get a lot of white women in the comments under GoFundMe's, well, is this verified? And, you got to break yourself from that spell. No one is coming to save us. All we have is each other, which is a lot. but it requires direct action from all of us. And I'm just going to sit this one out because whatever your excuse is that you're plugged in, I'm not powerful enough. I'm just one person. You're one person, but one person in a collective of millions can change the entire course of the history of the world. That's all that ever has. Unplug yourself from the propaganda machine that tells you that you aren't powerful, because fascists don't work this hard to suppress what they don't fear. They're terrified of you knowing the truth. That's why they hate TikTok. And that's why they bought it. They hate anything that allows the citizens to disseminate information directly to each other, because that's a huge threat to their propaganda machine. They hate us feeding each other and protecting each other, because they know that if we actually did that in mass, this would be over in minutes.
Right. So how do we convince people to come together? I don't think it's as difficult as we all think, because I feel like and I've said this to other people, especially during this time now where people are feeling very hopeless and they feel like, that they're powerless, that they can't do anything. And it's always that reminder to be like, there's so many more of us that feel that that something's wrong, that want to make a change, that want to go beyond. It's not even going beyond, but understanding that we don't have to ask for permission to do better.
And you can't. No one's coming. No one's going to.
No one's coming. No one's coming to save us. I mean, that's
things.
something as a Black woman I've known for a very long time.
There's two things that guide me in everything that I do as a person, and they are two sides of the same coin. There is a very famous abolitionist named, we're going to have to get Marame Kamba. We'll get it right. But there's a very famous abolitionist saying, which is, hope is a discipline. And hopelessness is propaganda. So stop spreading that shit.
I think that's very powerful.
I need you to step into your power. I need you to step into your power, American nurses. If we wanted to, we could unionize every workforce in the country. And then safe staffing would not be a pathetic little, please, mommy, can I not kill my patients, please? Conversation that we've been having for decades. Because we would have unbelievable amounts of bargaining power, right? We could cut this administrative bureaucratic bloat, all of these C-suite leeches that provide zero value to the healthcare system, but exist just to siphon money off the top, right? We can cut a lot of those jobs. That can be done by AI. I can promise you that. Not that I want to support AI. AI is horrible, folks. But, every good thing that we have in America was won through the collective power of the people. Your 8-hour workday, your 40-hour work week, the fact that we don't let 5-year-olds get their fingers chopped off in factories anymore. Everything we have, we created. I'm so obsessed with history because I personally find it unbelievably empowering to look back at what other humans have accomplished and say, gosh, no matter what I'm facing, my ancestors have dealt with infinitely worse and overcome infinitely worse with so much less. I'm Irish, actually. A lot of Americans say that they're Irish American and they're not. False valor. Stolen Irish valor. I'm actually Irish, from a big Irish family called the McLaughlins. And I think of what my ancestors, I'm also a little bit Scottish, mostly Irish though. I think of what my ancestors labored under English genocidal ethnic cleansing rule for 900 years. I think of those who survived the famine and made the passage and came here and started life with nothing. And I think so many of us, if you're in the US or Canada, right, many of us have those stories if you're not Indigenous. And if you are not came from chattel slavery, unfortunately, and you don't know your origins, but many of us do. We know the general origins of our story. And so I think about what they endured and what I have. I'm one of the most educated women to ever walk the planet. Do you think about that, nurses? Just envision how many billions of people have existed throughout the totality of humans on Earth. And think about the power that you have, the education that you have. We are the product of most women's wildest dreams.
100%.
You have the ability. I mean, in America, we also have access to an unbelievable amount of guns. We have things that other nations all across the world don't have. And so the idea that we're powerless, I want to be kind and I want to be inviting, but you got to cut that shit out. Especially white women, which is the vast majority of our profession in the US, and I'm sure in Canada as well.
Yes, is very similar in terms of like the demographics. I don't think they're much different. I would say that they're probably exactly the same.
So cut that shit out. That's the first step. I love you, and I'm
Cut
gonna
that
hold your
shit
hand
out.
with a napkin as I say this. Hope is a discipline, and hopelessness is doing the work of your enemy for you. So cut that shit out.
Yep. I think that, you know, this whole conversation, like I think I was thinking it would go one way, and I think this is the right, like I think this is exactly where we needed to be. And it's funny because it goes right to where I wanted to talk about, where at the end of your article you talk about rebuilding the house, and I think we've kind of touched on a lot of how we can rebuild the house.
That came from you. You talk about rebuilding the house.
Well, again, I think it's true that there's so much rooting that we have to do. Pulling out those weeds, pulling out those thoughts where we can't do this, I can't. My grandmother, that's funny. My grandmother used to have this saying to me when I was young, because she hated whenever I said the word I can't. She would say to me, she'd like, Amie, only a sluggard says I can't. I'm like, what the hell is that, Grandma? And she was like, trust me, look it up. You are not that. You have power and agency. And I think that fundamental belief, because even sometimes I get it in my head where it's just like I see the stuff happening and I'm like, I'm only one person and it's a trap. It really is a trap for us to
sit and say. So this work is 1,000 times harder and more depressing alone. It's not meant to be done alone.
It isn't.
So if you are alone, you're probably really struggling. And I feel that in my bones, but this work cannot be done alone.
It can't.
The despair and the agony of watching the brutality and the evil through this little rectangle hell machine that we all have connected to our hands at all times. First of all, the human brain was not meant to process that amount of information. So you are allowed to rest. And you are allowed to cry and you are allowed to grieve, but you are not free to cease the work, right? You are not wholly responsible for it, but you're not free from it either.
Right.
So you have to plug into community, and you have to never let the work of people trying to make you question what you see with your very eyes change you, right? We're at a point in the fascist regime where what we were being told with primarily wholly state-run media, CBS is a complete propaganda machine. Pretty much they all are now, though. They've pretty much all completely fallen in line. So plug into independent media sources and plug in with other revolutionary people who are doing the work.
Yep. I think it's important that community is where it's at. Whenever I felt like that moment where I'm alone, literally, I'll talk to my husband and he'll be like, hey, we had this conversation here. Let me show you this video here. And it's just, you continue to see how many other people want to do this work or have the same thoughts, the same fears, the same concerns, the same, holy shit, what? That you have. Yeah. But also says, here's how we're going to build. Here's how we're going to change. And that, I think that's the little piece that's probably missing from nursing as a whole too, is just like, we don't know how to build. We know we have the bits and parts, but we don't know how to build and we don't know how to bring people together. And I think it's so important that I've always said community to me has been the most important. Whenever I felt I was in my darkest moment, having community, people around me to say, you know what, you're not alone, is so powerful. And I think that's how we will make change. And like my cousin says, so I don't know if you know that my cousin Sandy Hudson, but she always says, she's like, we will win.
Yeah.
It's her line. She's like, we will win. Don't. She's like, I'm not going to talk about anything else, but I know that we will win. And I agree. She's right. And in those moments, I'm like, okay, we will win. It's hard. It's sometimes demoralizing, but it's like you said, it's important that we take the time to rest as well, but to be able to get back up with other people and say that we will win. Because I truly believe that we'll get there. I do.
But there's going to be a lot of sacrifice.
Of course. Of course. I mean,
And
you
that
only
only
look back
comes,
to history to see how it unfolds, right? We
and
can't forget.
I want white women to know that Renee Nicole Good is what a good white person looks like. Renee Nicole Good was a class and race traitor. She put her white body in between the fascists and their prey, and they killed her for it. That is what we're up against. Put your strongly worded letters down. If you think that, at this point, I don't know if there's going to be any more electoral politics. That's where we're at. That's how fascists roll. If there is going to be 2028 midterms, they're going to be heavily featuring ICE, which, is not a free and fair election. So,
right. That's a very terrifying thought.
But that's where we're at. So
yeah, that's true. I believe that.
To me, the reality, being grounded in the reality is less scary than operating in delusion.
Right. And I think it's important that Canadians pay attention too. There's been a lot of words that are coming out of the
I mean, you guys are fighting your own battles. Everywhere across the globe, late stage capitalists are trying to privatize what little socialist.
Yep. They're trying to come for healthcare here too.
Privatize your healthcare, which is going to make it horrific as American healthcare is.
Yep. People are, no, we'll still have access to OHIP. And it's just like, all you have to do is let it in a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it really opens the doors wide open.
The oligarchs have so successfully degraded so many elements of democracy, of social supports, of things that keep people alive. That's their goal. And if you're wondering, if you're not familiar with the absolute psychopaths of, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and Elon Musk, these are the people that are actually running our country. And they are the most terrifying human beings imaginable. Their goal for the future is to bring back actual slavery. And for the people who aren't enslaved in these mass prison systems that they're enacting and constructing as fast as possible, they want to make it so that no one owns anything and you rent and you have to pay subscriptions for every aspect of your life so that they can become trillionaires. That's their vision for the future. That's what we're up against.
Yeah, that's, again, and I think it's important that we know that. So we fight against that. And I think this is where, people didn't like the word woke, but you know what? It's time for people to truly wake the fuck up and do something.
I don't know, man. I'm a white woman, so I'm not gonna even begin to understand the depths of you're feeling this, but I am so fucking tired of white people. I'm so tired of us. I'm so tired of the nonsense, the delusion, the arrogance, the entitlement. I know that we need to band together, and I want to hold space for people on their own journey of liberatory discovery, because we're all at different points. I mean, I was pretty much ignorant about Palestine up until 2.5 years ago. I didn't know much at all. It was complicated. That's all I knew about it. That's all I was.
Yep.
So I don't say that because I'm better than anyone. We're all in our own states of unknowing and unplugging from the propaganda machine. But God, we're such losers in this day and age. With the amount of education we have access to all of the world's knowledge in our phones. And you got people arguing on the internet that actually the murdering, psychopathic, misogynistic fascist who blew away a soccer mom in the face and then called her a fucking bitch was justified somehow. I was having a conversation with my husband the other day because he understandably, has at certain points tried to set boundaries with me about when are we going to flee? What is the bar? Where do we, what, And I looked at him last night and I said, I am never leaving. So if you leave, you're going alone, because we are well-off white people. We will be hypothetically when we pay off a lot of debt one day on paper. But we are highly educated medical professionals. So we are people with essential skills that people need to survive. And at the end of the day, our community needs us. And there are so many people that we would be leaving behind to die. First and foremost, indigenous people. Where are they going to go? We took over their continent. We murdered the vast majority of them, subjected them to 400 years of genocide. We tried to wipe them off the face of the earth. And now us white people are going to bounce when things get a little dicey? Not for me. And I think there's a lot of people who do need to leave the US. 100%. People of color, Black people, trans people, queer people, non-binary folks. There's lots of people that I fully support that need to go if they can. But the reality is there will always be a tremendous amount who are left behind. And I will not leave them to the fate of being locked up with these psychopaths.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a very, I can see where you're coming from. Again, as a Canadian, there are
leaving, but I think if you're an able-bodied, wealthy white person, especially if you're a healthcare provider,
I can see where you're coming from.
And if you have kids, it's also different, but we don't.
I was gonna say I could see where you're coming from. And again, and I think there's also a certain disconnect from being Canadian to being American. And even, I would even say, even further removed as me being so I have my relatives that are Black Americans, and then I have my other family members that I would just consider Caribbean, right? Because again, if we try to trace that ancestry back, we're not going to go very far. But again, I think it just speaks to understanding the urgency of the situation, understanding where you're coming from, and that's a decision that you personally and your husband would have to make. And again, standing firm in that.
He's on board. He can never leave me. But these are the conversations that people are having all over the US.
But they are tough conversations, and I have heard other conversations of nurses and other disciplines and other people saying that, hey, if shit gets hard, they're going to leave. And again, I am not telling anybody what to do when it comes to that situation. However, I think that, these are conversations that need to be had. I don't want to leave on that note. It's a heavy conversation. Mental health wise, how do we look after one another?
Humans are pack animals, and the only path forward is collective action and community. You have to find other people that are doing the work of liberation. You have to find other people who are willing to do the work and make the sacrifices necessary. And everyone can contribute, right? Everyone can contribute, whether you're able-bodied or disabled, whether you're wealthy or there is a role for everyone. But the first step is acknowledging and stepping into your power as a citizen of the United States of America, the most powerful, wealthy nation to ever exist in the history of the world. If you feel powerless, it's because a $1 trillion propaganda machine has worked incredibly hard to make you feel that way. And we are all have different levels of power and marginalization. So there are those of us who are more disempowered than other people. But even the most marginalized person in the US is powerful. They don't want you to know that, but you are. And you are important. And you matter. And any contributions you can make to this fight matter.
I think this is important that we find those spaces, we find those people, we find those resources. And you're right that we know that understand fundamentally how much power we have, because I think that that's the biggest piece, that these machines, these governments, these oligarchs, they want us to believe that
we're powerless, we're nothing,
powerless, we have nothing.
Comply. We should just comply, give them what they want.
Comply is definitely not in my bones. I'm not. And
I really encourage you to look toward the past.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation I have with people all of the time. We are all different, and we all have different skills and abilities and nervous systems. I was put on this earth to be in the Thunderdome. That's just how I'm wired, and that's how I was raised. That's not most people. That's great. Honestly, that's not.
We
This is
can't
not
all
an
be
earth
there.
like an office job. Trust me. In every resistance known to man, right? French resistance and the Polish resistance and World War II and Russia, all throughout history, there are thousands of jobs that need to be done. And feeding your neighbors is just as important as being on the front lines.
Yes, it is.
Or doing a flashier, you're a spy or you're carrying information, whatever it is, all of those jobs are equally important. Caring for your neighbors, caring for pets, caring for animals, doing the work of motivating other people. There are thousands of jobs that are going to be necessary to move us to a state of stability and safety and liberation for everyone. Whatever your unique skills are, whatever your personality is, it can and should be used to create liberation for all people. And it's okay if your resistance looks different than my resistance, look different than Amie's resistance. They're going to, inevitably. We're going to serve different roles. We're in different communities. We're all facing, a microcosm of slightly different challenges, but step into your power. Never, ever forget that these fascists are fucking terrified of you. They're terrified of you. And they're terrified of me. They're terrified of the truth.
There's a reason they walk around wearing masks.
They're terrified of science. They're terrified of difference. They're terrified of love. The thing about fascists and strongman authoritarians in general is they are the biggest pussies on planet Earth. They are, historically. They're very small. And it's why they puff themselves out so greatly. And they can do tremendous harm and violence. No one's saying that they're not dangerous. They're incredibly dangerous. But they're terrified. And never forget that. And never forget that struggle is a human experience throughout all times and all continents. And resistance is a story as old as time. And there's a lot of wins throughout history. And I encourage you to go back and look at successful resistances and periods of time in which people just had to weather very difficult times. We are not the first. We will not be the last.
Yep.
We do it together.
I completely agree with you, Meg. There's nothing more for me to add in terms of the conversation that we've had here. I think it was a very fruitful one. I really hope that a lot of nurses, and I don't just have nurses that listen, a lot of other people take away from the conversation that we had today. Because I think even I feel, I don't want to say the word empowered, but I think it's just about how you can position yourself in a different way and think about things in a different way. And again, I think knowledge is power. I pick up a fucking book. Like, nurses, please do yourselves a favor and understand that the world's not this small. And I think that we have so much more power than we know. And it's just like, pick up a book, ask questions, be curious. Say no. Say no. Oh my God. If nurses can learn to say no, just even that is a form, saying no is a form of resistance. I think that, yeah.
Saying no, lying, breaking the law. The thing about fascists is they're just going to keep changing the law until any form of resistance or disagreement, and we're already there. Being a trans activist is now, I'm already on an FBI list because I support gender affirming care for folks,
That's
the reality
crazy.
is, under fascism, laws don't matter at all because they just change them to feed their whims. And so, free yourself from this idea that lawfulness is morality, because we know for a fact it's not. Slavery was legal, segregation was legal, the Holocaust was legal. We know that. You know that intellectually, but your body is so trained for the white supremacy of perfection that the idea of doing things like breaking laws or getting arrested is still, I think, extremely difficult for white women, especially. And especially for upper class white women.
Yep, call them in, Meg. It's important that we do. And I think that, you know what? I think this is a perfect conversation to have that calling in, particularly within nursing as a profession. So, Meg, thank you so much for coming on the Gritty Nurse podcast. I think we could keep talking. I definitely feel that we can keep talking. And I want to, maybe this is an offline conversation, but you mentioned about writing a book. Maybe we need to use art in a different way. Maybe it needs to be a film. Maybe it needs to be
Yeah.
something more hyper realistic for people to truly understand what's really happening. Because I think that you can do some really amazing things with art. I've been dabbling in some of it myself, and I feel like there's a variety of ways to be able to get messages across. And I think that we need to start being creative in how we, just like, during the transatlantic slave trade, and how messages were told back then and how we shared knowledge. I think we might have to have a returning to how
Every
we
avenue.
send messages out and how we communicate with folks. So thank you again, Meg, for coming on. We have to have more conversations. And even
I'm
though you're
here.
not going to flee, you need to come to Canada sometime.
Yeah, I would love to under different circumstances.
Yes, absolutely. Make it like a vacation, not an escape.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Meg, for coming on. It was a fruitful conversation, and we have to stay in touch. And of course, I'm going to post where people can find the article, any specific place where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm just launching a Substack for even more illegal leftist scum ideas like healthcare and freedom and due process. So if you like my work, if you're interested in learning more about the intersection of nursing and healthcare and politics and culture, you can follow my Substack, the RN Underground Press.
Ooh, I love it.
And I'm also working on writing a course with my dear friend Tasiah Coleman on
Really?
fascism for we're with the very I pitched her. I was like, can we write a course on resisting fascism for healthcare workers? And she was like, yeah. So we're gonna do that. So keep an eye out for that.
You want to share?
Yeah,
Share
absolutely.
widely, please.
Yeah. As soon as it's live. And I mean, she's an absolutely phenomenal speaker. So we're hopefully gonna tour it until they put us in the camps.
They ain't gonna put you no camps. We ain't gonna let that happen. That's not gonna happen.
They can try.
That's a fight that we'd have to have, because then, I'll be a part of that too. We have to work together. So thank you again, Meg, for coming on.
Thanks
And
so much.
we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Looking for a great gift for a nurse or someone who needs to learn about nursing? Check out my national best-selling book, The Wisdom of Nurses: Stories of Grit from the Bedside. Thank you so much for listening to The Gritty Nurse with Amie Archibald-Varley. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, please hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss out on any awesome episodes from The Gritty Nurse. Thank you so much, and stay tuned until next time. Stay gritty.